Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. I want to talk this afternoon a bit about the right approach to meditation, the right attitude of mind. You've heard me before talk about simplifying and purifying. Another way to express that is that what we are seeking, what we are moving towards, is actually a more natural state of mind. There's the tendency, I think especially for people beginning meditation, to look upon the path as going somewhere else, leading on to something that is new, that is beyond, that is additional to what is already present in the psyche. And this is really a wrong-headed approach that leads to frustration. One of the most famous Zen koans stated, "What was your original face before you were born?" In that phrase, if we understand born as not only referring or even particularly referring to your physical birth in this existence, but born as being manifest, as coming into being. And if we understand before, not so much in a temporal sense as related to time, but as what was your face before you became manifest or without manifestation. Any coming into being is a taking on of form, a taking on of complexity. And there's a tendency for complexity to multiply itself. There's a word in Pali papancha that refers to the activity or tendency of the mind to complicate things, to add layer after layer of complication and elaboration. In our minds, we build elaborate structures. And if you examine this process while it's happening, you can see that very often it's a misguided attempt to get out of suffering. There's some suffering in the being, and the mind tries to build either defenses or escape routes or alternatives. And it's a process without really a resolution, without a definitive ending, because the mind will just keep adding to it. Something to notice when you are meditating is that whenever the mind goes into this process of papancha, or actually whenever it's constructing sankharas, whenever the thought formation begins to intrude on the piece of the meditation, notice how the suffering increases. That this is a way of producing suffering. And if you consciously and deliberately move away from suffering in the mind, you're always moving towards clarity and simplicity and emptiness, vastness. And none of these are factors that we're conjuring up, that we're creating. They're actually there all the time. We're just uncovering them. You recall that the supreme accomplishment of the Buddha, as described in the account of his struggle and his night of awakening, the final knowledge that arose in him that was equivalent to full Buddhahood was the knowledge of the destruction of the asawas. The asawas being the root defilements. So it wasn't that Bodhi awakening was something outside of himself, additional to himself, that was added to his being. It was there all along. It's there in all of us. But we don't experience it, we don't realize it because of various layers of defilements and sankharas. There's a sense in which getting deeper into meditation and experiencing more pristine, simple, clear, open states of mind is a kind of remembering. It's like we've forgotten who and what we truly are. And we've confused ourselves with layers and layers of complication, of elaboration, diversification. So that, for example, states of jhana are more natural to our intrinsic being than sense desire consciousness. And jhana is not something new that's attained. It's something that's intrinsically always possible as soon as the nirvanas are quieted down. As soon as the mind isn't doing that, it does this. Something more pure, more simple, more immediate and natural. The nirvanas, sense desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, anxiety and skeptical doubt, are superficial. We have our attention pulled away, and we go off down these paths, lead to further complication, further papancha, further piling sankhara onto sankhara. And when we just stop following those paths, we don't really have to do anything else. The mind will naturally settle into deeper peacefulness. samadhi will deepen. Remember that samadhi means stillness, means stability, non-wavering. It's not doing that. Then the jhana factors like piti and sukha naturally arise because they're not being suppressed or diverted. And realizing insight too, practicing vipassana, is the same thing. When we just rest in the citta and let the knowing happen, we're not obstructing it by identifying with the objects. And we find that sublime quality of upekkha, of equanimity, of being centered, not being disturbed or disrupted. And we can see the sankharas as they arise as empty, without intrinsic interest, and we don't identify with them. Then they don't multiply and complicate. But if we get involved in them, if we take the wrong kind of interest and identify with them, then they'll lead us further and further astray into greater complication, greater complexity, and it's always more suffering. The movement in meditation is always towards the fundamental root of being, toward a primordially natural state, the intrinsic essence of what you are. And at the very end is nibbana, the unconditioned, before there's any manifestation whatsoever. And once manifestation happens, it has a tendency to complexify itself, to move outwards, take on more complex features, piling sankhara onto sankhara. So it's a little difficult to understand this because our mind wants to work in models of linear time. So should be cautious when we talk about a state being primordial. It doesn't mean in terms of a beginning of time. The Buddha said the beginning of samsara is not to be known. Nibbana is not something before time, but something outside of time. Time doesn't apply in the unconditioned. Time is a function of the conditioned. But we can think of these as two modes, the conditioned and the unconditioned. And within the conditioned there are layers. It's not just one or the other. There are layers within the conditioned. When we deepen our samadhi and move into states of jhana or into formless states, we're in a condition of mind that's less conditioned. So it's more basic, more natural. It's primordial in the sense of not having yet taken on those extra layers. There is a concept we find in Hinduism of the breath of Brahma. Brahma being the God of the universe, and he breathes in and he breathes out. And when he's breathing out, the universe is expanding and becoming more complex and developing. And when he breathes in, it's contracting, becoming simpler, returning to the source. In the Buddhist cosmology, there's a somewhat similar idea of the unfolding and infolding of world systems. When a new world system arises, it comes into existence from the top down. So the Brahma realms appear one after the other, beginning with the fourth Brahma realm. So here we see a movement, an unfolding, a movement from simplicity and from very pristine states of existence with a minimum of factors, from equanimity to bliss to rapture to thought formation to sense experience. And it's a movement of coming into being downward, descending into manifestation. And then when a world system comes to an end, it's an infolding. It's destroyed from the bottom up. First the terrestrial realms, the earth realm, then the sensual heavens, one after the other. Then the Brahma realms, and in some periods of destruction it goes as high as the third Brahma realm. And this is a replication on a macrocosmic scale of the process that goes on in the mind. And this parallel is made explicit in the Abhidharmakosha, relating the attainment of the various jhanas to destruction of world systems. When the world is destroyed by fire, it burns everything up to the first Brahma realm. And according to the Abhidharmakosha, fire is equivalent of thought formation. And when thought formation ceases, the whole sense desire realm has fallen away, and the first Brahma level falls away. Destruction by water drowns everything up to the second Brahma level, just as second jhana is marked by piti. And when the mind moves into third jhana, that whole realm of piti or rapture falls away. So the experience is simplified further, because bliss or sukha is a more pure, a more primordial expression of mind than rapture. And when the world is destroyed by wind, it blows everything to pieces up to the third Brahma level. So it's said that in fourth jhana, breath ceases. Whether that's physiologically so or not is not really important. The perception of breath, the experience of breath ceases. The mind is in pure equanimity. So there's barely any perception of the body at all. So the mind is in a very simple state, very pure, pristine state. And with the basis in equanimity, it's unshakable. That equanimity parallels the equanimity of formations in the Vipassana path. That when the mind reaches to the state of equanimity about formations, it's unshakable. The chitta is simply knowing without becoming involved. So that again is a very simple, pristine, primordial, empty kind of state of mind. There's simply the knowing. There's no activity of grasping or building or manipulating or avoiding or creating. There's just knowing. And that naturally simplifies the rest of experience, because no energy is being invested into any of it. And that very simple, pure, pristine state of mind has a very light mooring to manifestation, to existence, to becoming. And it easily slips. The anchor easily slips. And the mind does a sideways slip out of the conditioned experience altogether and is able to touch upon Nibbana. Which is the ultimate natural primordial state of mind without any creation, destruction, coming, going, without reference to time, without reference to space, without reference to body or even really to mind. So to bring it back to a simple practical formula, when you're meditating, always try and make the movement of mind towards greater simplicity and purity and clarity, emptiness, openness. And notice when you do that you're moving away from suffering. And when you fail to do that, and when you move into greater complexity, when you start building formations, there's always some suffering involved in that.